She was just the hired help. My aunt told the lawyer she deserves nothing. I replied, then you won't mind if we check the nursing home security footage from the day the will was signed. Can you imagine dedicating 3 years of your life to being the sole caregiver for the person you love most, sacrificing your career, your savings, your entire future, only to be called a gold digger and thrown out of your own home by the one person who should have been thanking you? I stood in the cold, sterile office of an estate lawyer, my hands shaking so badly I had to clench them into fists inside my jacket pockets to hide it. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and my aunt's cloyingly sweet perfume. That was the moment the fog of grief began to clear, replaced by a cold, hard rage I didn't know I was capable of. The woman I had become to survive the last 3 years was gone, and someone new was clawing her way out. My name is Clara, I'm 32 years old, and I used to be a paralegal. My life, before the storm, was neat. That's the best word for it. I had a great apartment in Chicago with a view of the lake if you craned your neck just right. I worked as a paralegal for a mid-sized corporate law firm, a job that satisfied the part of my brain that loves order, evidence, and clear-cut rules. I had friends, a favorite coffee shop, a dating life that was more miss than hit, but still entertaining. It was a life I had built for myself, brick by brick, far away from the stifling, gossipy confines of my small hometown, Maple Creek, Ohio. The anchor of my life, the one constant I always had, was my grandmother, Eleanor. She wasn't just my grandmother, she was my best friend. While my own parents were, let's just say, emotionally distant and more concerned with appearances, Grandma Eleanor was my sanctuary. She was the one who taught me how to bake, how to identify constellations, and how to stand up for myself. When I was a kid and my parents would praise my older cousin's C in calculus while ignoring my straight A's, Grandma Eleanor would pull me aside and whisper, "Quiet rivers run deep, Clara. Don't you ever let them make you feel small." Her house, a beautiful old Victorian with a sprawling garden, was the only place that ever truly felt like home. My Aunt Susan, my mother's sister, was the polar opposite. She was the loud, flashy river. She'd escaped Maple Creek for Phoenix, married a man with a questionable tan and a lot of debt disguised as assets, and had 2 kids who were perpetually featured in glossy Christmas cards. Susan's visits were rare, whirlwind events. She'd sweep in for a holiday, bearing extravagant but impersonal gifts, take 100 photos for her Facebook page captioned #FamilyFirst, and then vanish, leaving a trail of perfume and faint chaos in her wake. She and Grandma had a strained relationship. Susan always seemed to want something. Her compliments always felt like they had a price tag attached. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday in October. It was my mom. Her voice was flat, matter of fact. "Your grandmother fell. She broke her hip. The doctor is talking about a full-time care facility." A care facility. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I knew what that meant for a woman as fiercely independent as Eleanor. It would be a prison. That weekend, I drove the 5 hours from Chicago to Maple Creek. Walking into the hospital room was like seeing a monument crumble. My vibrant, strong grandmother was a fragile bird lost in a sea of white sheets and beeping machines. She grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Don't let them put me in a home, Clara," she pleaded, her voice raspy. "I want to be in my own house. In my garden." Later that evening, in her quiet, empty house, I sat at the kitchen table where she'd taught me to roll out pie crust. The promise she'd made me 100 times echoed in my ears. "You love this house as much as I do," she'd always say, tending to her roses. "When I'm gone, it's yours. It's in the will. It's for you, for everything." It was never about the monetary value. It was about the home, the sanctuary. I called my boss the next day and requested a leave of absence. My Aunt Susan called me that night. "Oh, honey, that's so sweet of you," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "But it's too much for you. She needs professionals. I found a lovely place near me in Arizona, the Golden Vista. We could sell the house to pay for it. It would be the most practical thing to do. Sell the house." Her words were so casual, so dismissive. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. "No, Susan," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "She wants to be home. I'm going to take care of her." There was a pause on the line, and for a second, I thought I heard something other than practiced sympathy. It was a sharp, flinny sound. The sound of a door slamming shut. "Well," she finally said, her tone suddenly chilly. "Don't say I didn't warn you. It's going to be harder than you think." She was right about that. What I didn't know was that she was the one who was going to make it 100 times harder. I was about to walk into a battle I didn't even know was being waged, and I had just given up all my armor. The next 3 years were a blur of sacrifice and exhaustion. I officially quit my job, packed up my Chicago apartment, and moved into the guest room of my grandmother's house. My life became a meticulously organized schedule of medications, doctor's appointments, physical therapy sessions, and meal preparations. The vibrant, independent life I had built for myself was gone, replaced by the quiet, demanding rhythm of being a full-time caregiver. Some days were beautiful. We'd sit in the garden, and for a few hours, the Parkinson's would loosen its cruel grip, and she'd be my old grandma Eleanor again, telling me stories about growing up in Maple Creek. We'd watch old black-and-white movies, and I'd read to her for hours from her favorite novels. These were the moments that fueled me, that made the endless nights and crushing loneliness bearable. But the hard days were brutal. There were falls, moments of terrifying confusion, and the slow, heartbreaking erosion of the brilliant woman I knew. I learned to bathe her, to dress her, to help her with the most intimate tasks, all while trying to preserve her dignity. My friends from Chicago would call, their voices full of stories about promotions, weddings, and vacations. I'd listen, offering congratulations, while trying to ignore the gnawing ache of the life I'd left behind. I was 29, then 30, then 31, and my world had shrunk to the four walls of that house. My savings dwindled, first on groceries, then on uncovered medical supplies, then on hiring a part-time nurse for a few hours a week, so I could just go to the grocery store alone without worrying. Aunt Susan, meanwhile, perfected the art of performative concern. She'd call once a week, always at an inconvenient time, and ask in a loud, cheerful voice, "So, how's our patient today?" As if Grandma were a project and not a person. She never asked how I was. Her visits were even worse. Twice a year, she'd descend upon the house like a minor celebrity. She'd bring expensive lotions that Grandma's sensitive skin couldn't tolerate and silk pajamas that were impossible for her to put on. She'd take a flurry of selfies with Grandma, carefully positioned to hide the medical equipment, and post them with captions like, "So blessed to spend quality time with my amazing mother." #caregiver life, #family is everything. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. I, the actual caregiver, was usually relegated to the role of photographer. One afternoon, Susan arrived for her summer visit. I was bone-tired, having been up all night with Grandma, who had a bad bout of sundowning. Susan waltzed in, complaining about the humidity. "Clara, honey, you look exhausted. You're getting lines around your eyes," she said, peering at me critically. "This isn't sustainable. You're letting your life waste away here." "I've fine, Susan. Grandma is having a good day today," I replied through gritted teeth. "Right," she said, unconvinced. She then produced a stack of papers from her designer handbag. "Listen, I know you're overwhelmed, so I wanted to help. These are just some financial documents, insurance forms, things we need to get organized for Mom. Since you're so busy with the hands-on stuff, I can take care of the paperwork. Lighten your load." This was the moment. The red flag, waving so violently in the wind it was practically screaming. A part of my brain, the trained paralegal, knew better. Never let someone else handle important documents you haven't reviewed. But the exhausted, overwhelmed, and lonely part of me, the part that desperately wanted to believe a family member was genuinely trying to help, won out. It was my greatest mistake. "Oh," I said, my voice weak with a gratitude I would come to curse. "Wow, Susan. Thank you. That would actually be a huge help." She gave me a brilliant, predatory smile. "Of course, sweetie. That's what family is for." She then mentioned that a few things needed to be notarized, and she knew a guy who could come to the house, making it easier on Eleanor. "No need for you to worry your pretty little head about it," she'd said, patting my hand. I let her. I was so tired of worrying. I let her take the lead. I let her arrange the notary. I let her help my grandmother sign a few things she described as just routine updates for the bank. I stood in the kitchen making tea while it happened in the living room, grateful for the 5 minutes of perceived peace. A few weeks later, Grandma had a rare moment of perfect lucidity. It was late at night, and she grabbed my arm, her eyes sharp and clear. "Clara," she whispered urgently. The papers Susan had me sign. I don't remember what they were. My head was so foggy that day. A spike of pure ice shot through my veins. She kept saying it was to help you. "It's okay, Grandma," I soothed, my heart pounding against my ribs. "It was just bank stuff. To make paying bills easier." She shook her head, a tear tracing a path down her wrinkled cheek. "Be careful of her, honey. Your heart is good. Hers has holes in it. The lucidity passed as quickly as it came, and she drifted back into the fog. I pushed her words down, chalking them up to confusion. It was easier to believe that than to confront the terrifying possibility that I had just willingly handed the wolf the keys to the hen house. Grandma Eleanor passed away 6 months later. It was peaceful in her own bed, with me holding her hand. The grief was a physical weight, a crushing, silent thing that hollowed me out. The days following her death were a blur of phone calls, funeral arrangements, and the empty, echoing silence of the house. Susan flew in, cloaked in designer black, playing the role of the grieving daughter to perfection. She took charge, greeting guests at the funeral home, accepting condolences with a practiced, sorrowful nod. I felt like a ghost, drifting through the motions, too numb to process anything beyond the profound loss of my grandmother. The will reading was scheduled for the following week at the office of a local lawyer, Mr. Henderson, a man I didn't recognize. Grandma's longtime lawyer had retired a year prior. Susan had insisted on using this new man, claiming he was highly recommended. That should have been another red flag. We sat in his stuffy office. My parents were there, looking uncomfortable. Susan sat ramrod straight, a black leather portfolio clutched in her lap. I just wanted it to be over. I wanted to go back to the house, curl up in Grandma's favorite armchair, and just be. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat and began. This is the last will and testament of Eleanor Vance, signed and executed on. He read a date from 4 months ago. My blood ran cold. The date. It was the day the notary Susan had arranged had come to the house. The day Grandma had been so foggy. And as for my primary residence at 124 Maple Avenue, and the entirety of my remaining estate, including all financial accounts and personal effects, he continued, I bequeath them in full to my beloved daughter, Susan Miller. The words didn't register at first. They were just sounds disconnected from meaning. I looked at the lawyer, then at Susan. She was staring straight ahead, her expression a perfect mask of solemnity. My mother gasped softly. My father just stared at his shoes. What? I finally managed to whisper. The sound was thin, fragile. No, that's not right. Her will, the house was for me. Mr. Henderson gave me a pitying look. I'm sorry, Mississippi. This is the most recent legally executed will. It supersedes all previous versions. Susan finally turned to me, her eyes devoid of any warmth. Mom changed her mind, Clara, she said, her voice smooth as glass. She was worried you were becoming fixated. She felt it was for the best. Fixated. The word was an insult, a slap in the face. I was her caregiver. I was here every single day for 3 years. You were here 4 times. My voice was rising, shaking. And that's when she delivered the line that shattered the last remnants of my grief and replaced it with a fury so pure it burned. She turned to the lawyer, giving a delicate little shrug. As I told you, she has a bit of an entitlement complex. She was just the hired help, really. We were grateful for her services, of course, but she seems to think that entitles her to the entire estate. She deserves nothing. Hired help. Deserves nothing. The air left my lungs. For 3 years, I had put my entire life on hold. I had drained my savings, lost my career, sacrificed my youth. I did it all out of love for the woman who had raised me. And in one sentence, my aunt had reframed my love as a transaction and my sacrifice as a job. A job for which I was now being told I wouldn't even be paid. Susan, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. What did you do? She scoffed. I did what my mother wanted. Now, if you'll excuse us, there's a lot to handle. She stood up, smoothing down her black dress. Mr. Henderson has the keys. The house needs to be vacated by the end of the week, so I can get it on the market. I'll be sure to pack up any of your personal items for you. Thrown out. She was throwing me out of my home. My grandmother's home. The rage that had been simmering erupted. This was when the old Clara, the one who avoided confrontation and trusted too easily, died. Then you won't mind if we check the nursing home security footage from the day the will was signed, I said, the words coming out colder and sharper than I ever thought possible. I hadn't even known for sure that Grandma had been at the short-term rehab facility on that exact date. It was a bluff, a desperate shot in the dark based on my grandmother's foggy memories. But the flicker of pure, unadulterated panic in Susan's eyes told me everything I needed to know. It was a direct hit. Before she could compose herself, I stood up, turned my back on all of them, and walked out of that office. I didn't know what I was going to do, or where I was going to go. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was not over. The war had just begun. The first few days were a waking nightmare. I was a ghost in my own home, packing my life into cardboard boxes, while Susan bustled around with a real estate agent, discussing staging and curb appeal. She spoke about Grandma's house, my home, with the cold detachment of a house flipper. "We'll need to rip out these old rose bushes, they're overgrown," she said loudly on the phone in the hallway, knowing I could hear her. "And the whole kitchen needs to be gutted. It's so dated." Each word was a calculated twist of the knife. My parents were useless. They called once, my mother whispering, "Maybe Susan is right, Clara. It's just a house. Don't make a scene." They were terrified of conflict, terrified of being cut out of Susan's newfound wealth. Their cowardice was almost as painful as Susan's betrayal. I moved onto the couch of an old high school friend, Sarah, the only person in Maple Creek who didn't immediately look at me with pity or suspicion. Being back in my hometown, a place I had so eagerly escaped, was a special kind of hell. Susan had wasted no time launching her smear campaign. She was a master of a certain kind of small-town politics. She'd stop for coffee at the town's only diner, the Maple Leaf, and speak in hushed, sorrowful tones about how poor Clara is struggling to accept her grandmother's final wishes. She spun a tale of a greedy, manipulative niece who had tried to take advantage of a sick old woman. She painted me as the villain, and herself as the dutiful daughter, reluctantly cleaning up the mess. The whispers followed me everywhere. When I went to the grocery store, people I had known my entire life would suddenly find something fascinating on a shelf of canned beans to avoid making eye contact. Mrs. Gable, my third-grade teacher, gave me a tight, disapproving frown from across the aisle. The betrayal was layered, a poisoned cake. First Susan, then my parents, and now the entire town. I was an outcast. The physical toll was immense. I couldn't eat. I'd lie awake on Sarah's lumpy couch, my heart hammering against my ribs, replaying Susan's words over and over. Hired help. Deserves nothing. My hands would shake so badly some mornings I couldn't hold a coffee cup. I was having full-blown panic attacks, gasping for air in Sarah's bathroom, convinced the walls were closing in. Rock bottom came about a month after the funeral. A for sale sign went up in front of Grandma's house, a bright, garish sign from a Phoenix-based realty group Susan had insisted on using. It felt like a final desecration. That afternoon, I saw Susan's rental car parked outside the house. On a desperate impulse, I pulled over. I just wanted to talk to her, to appeal to whatever shred of humanity she had left. I found her in the garden, directing a landscaper to tear out the very rose bushes Grandma had spent 50 years cultivating. "Susan, please," I started, my voice cracking. "Don't do this." This was her favorite part of the house. This was our garden. She turned, her face a mask of irritation. "Clara, this is no longer your concern. It's my property now. We're trying to maximize its value." "Property?" I choked out. "This is our family's history. How can you be so cold?" "The world is cold, Clara," she snapped, her voice losing its polished facade. "It's about time you learned that. You sat here in this little fairy tale house while the rest of us were out in the real world, working. You think you're entitled to a reward for doing what you should have done anyway? It's pathetic." The cruelty was so breathtaking, so absolute, that it finally snapped me out of my daze. The grief and panic were burned away by a white-hot anger. This wasn't about a misunderstanding. This was intentional. This was theft. That night, I went online. I used the last of my savings to hire the best family law and probate attorney I could find in Columbus, a woman named Jessica Davies. She had a reputation for being a shark. The paralegal in me, the part of me that had been dormant and grieving, finally woke up. Our first video call was sobering. "I'll be honest, Clara," Jessica said, her tone professional and direct. "Contesting a signed and notarized will is an uphill battle. Undue influence is incredibly difficult to prove. We need more than just your word against hers. We need cold, hard evidence." "I know," I said, my voice steady for the first time in weeks. "And I think I know where to start looking." I told her about my bluff, about the nursing home. It was a long shot. But as I started digging, using the research skills I'd honed for years as a paralegal, a new, even more shocking picture began to emerge. I wasn't just fighting Susan's greed. I was fighting her desperation. I found public records of a failed spa business she'd started in Scottsdale. Then a lien against their house. Then, through a public records search in Arizona, I found 2 active lawsuits from creditors for over $100,000. My aunt wasn't just trying to get rich. She was trying to keep from drowning. This wasn't just a grab for a comfortable retirement. It was a frantic, desperate move to save her own skin. And she was willing to destroy me and my grandmother's legacy to do it. The mid-story twist wasn't just a plot point. It was a call to arms. My fight wasn't just for a house anymore. It was for justice. And I was going to get it. The next few months were my training montage. While Susan was busy trying to fast-track the sale of the house, I was living and breathing the case. I moved from Sarah's couch to a tiny, cheap rental apartment an hour outside of Maple Creek, a war room where I could work without the prying eyes of the town. Jessica Davies was my general, and I was her field sergeant. My past life as a paralegal, which Susan had so cruelly mocked, was now my greatest weapon. I spent hours on the phone, my voice calm and professional, chasing down leads. My first major breakthrough was the nursing home. Grandma had been at Oakwood Meadows Rehabilitation Center for 3 weeks after her hip surgery, before I was cleared to bring her home. I cross-referenced the date on the new will with the facility's visitor logs. Bingo! Susan Miller had signed in at 2:15 p.m. and signed out at 3:30 p.m. on that exact day. The notary she'd used, a man named George Peterson, had signed in with her. Next, I delved into Grandma's medical records from her stay, which I had legal access to as her former healthcare proxy. I spent days poring over nurses' notes, medication charts, and doctors' reports. And there it was, in black and white, a note from a nurse named Brenda, timed at 1 p.m. on the day the will was signed. Patient Eleanor V. is disoriented and confused this afternoon following her new pain medication dosage. Unable to recall the current day or her location. Vitals stable. Will monitor. My hands were shaking as I scanned the document and emailed it to Jessica. This was more than a gut feeling. This was evidence. This was proof that my grandmother was not of sound mind. Jessica was ecstatic. "This is good, Clara. This is really good," she said over the phone. "This puts the burden of proof squarely back on Susan. But we need more. We need a knockout punch." The knockout punch felt impossibly far away. Jessica's team filed the lawsuit, officially contesting the will. The sale of the house was frozen by a court injunction, which sent Susan into a rage. She left me a series of furious voicemails, calling me a vindictive little bitch and threatening to countersue for emotional distress. I saved every single one. My days were spent building a timeline, a massive document that cross-referenced Susan's phone records, which we subpoenaed, her financial records, and the nursing home logs. The picture it painted was damning. A flurry of calls between Susan and the lawyer who drafted the new will in the days leading up to the signing. A large cash withdrawal from her bank account the day before, probably to pay the shady notary. I also hired a private investigator with some of the money I borrowed from my now-depleted 401k. He dug deeper into Susan's financial ruin in Arizona. It was worse than I thought. Her husband's business had also failed. They were on the verge of foreclosure. This wasn't just about paying off creditors. This was about maintaining the facade of their perfect, wealthy life, a facade they were willing to commit fraud to protect. The hardest part was the human element. Jessica insisted we get a statement from Brenda, the nurse. I had to go back to Maple Creek and meet her at a coffee shop. She was hesitant at first, scared of getting involved. "I remember your grandmother," she said softly. "She was a sweet lady. And I remember her daughter, your aunt. She was very demanding. I didn't push. I just told her my story. I told her about the garden, about my promise, about the 3 years I had given. I showed her a picture of me and Grandma, laughing on the porch swing. By the end of our coffee, her eyes were filled with tears. She wasn't herself that day," Brenda said, her voice firm. "And I'll be damned if I let that woman get away with this. I'll testify." The final piece of the puzzle came from the most unexpected place. While packing the last of my boxes from the house, I'd found a small, decorative tin where Grandma kept old buttons. At the bottom, under a layer of felt, was a letter. It was in Grandma's familiar, elegant handwriting, dated a year before she died. It was addressed to me. "My dearest Clara," it began. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone. I want you to know again, in my own hand, that this house is your home. It is a small thank you for the immeasurable gift you have given me, your time, your love, your life. I have told Susan this a dozen times, though I fear it falls on deaf ears. She sees assets where I see memories. Be strong. This house is yours." The day before the trial was set to begin, Susan's lawyer called Jessica with a settlement offer. $50,000, and I would have to drop the suit and sign an NDA. Tell them to go to hell, I told Jessica, my voice clear and cold. This wasn't about the money. This was about the truth. It was about my grandmother's last wishes and my aunt's monstrous lies. We were going to court. The courtroom was small and suffocating, just like the town it was in. My parents were there, huddled in the back row, looking like they wanted to be anywhere else on earth. Susan sat at the opposing table, dressed in a conservative navy suit, looking poised and confident. She shot me a look of pure venom from across the room. I met her gaze and held it, my heart pounding a steady, determined rhythm. I was no longer the scared, grieving girl she'd thrown out of her home. I was a paralegal who had built an ironclad case, and I was about to watch my lawyer dismantle her piece by piece. Jessica Davies was magnificent. She was a master of controlled, methodical destruction. She started with the smaller witnesses. The real estate agent who testified about Susan's frantic rush to sell. The landscaper who confirmed he was told to gut the whole garden on Susan's orders. Each one was a small chip in Susan's armor of the grieving, dutiful daughter. Then, she called Nurse Brenda to the stand. Brenda was nervous but firm. She described Grandma Eleanor's condition on the day the will was signed. Confused, disoriented, not lucid. Susan's lawyer tried to trip her up on cross-examination. Isn't it possible she was just tired? Isn't it true that patients' conditions can fluctuate? It's possible, Brenda conceded calmly. But in my professional opinion, as a registered nurse with 15 years of experience in geriatric care, Eleanor Vance was not in a state to be making complex legal or financial decisions that afternoon. And I documented that in her official chart. She looked directly at the judge. It was a powerful blow. I could see a crack appear in Susan's composure. Next came the handwriting expert. He placed magnified images of my grandmother's signature from old checks and letters next to the signature on the new will. He explained in painstaking detail the subtle differences in pressure, the wavering in the loops, the slight hesitation in the strokes. The signature on the contested will exhibits multiple signs of being a guided hand signature, he concluded. This means the signatory's hand was likely being physically manipulated by another person. It is also possible it is a high-probability forgery, though a guided hand is the most likely scenario. The courtroom was silent. Susan was now visibly pale. But the true decimation began when Jessica called Susan herself to the stand. Jessica started gently, her voice deceptively soft. Mrs. Miller, you loved your mother very much, didn't you? Of course, Susan said, dabbing a dry eye with a tissue. More than anything. And you were only trying to honor her final wishes, is that correct? Yes. That's all I've ever wanted. Jessica let the lie hang in the air for a moment. Then she pounced. Isn't it true, Mrs. Miller, that at the time this new will was drafted, you and your husband were facing foreclosure on your home in Arizona? Objection. The judge overruled it. Susan stammered, her composure shattering. That's a private matter. Isn't it true, Jessica continued, her voice like steel, that you were being sued by two separate creditors for over $100,000? That your spa business had failed? That you were, in fact, financially desperate? Susan's face was a blotchy red. We had some temporary setbacks. Temporary setbacks that a $500,000 inheritance would conveniently solve, correct? Objection. Sustained. Move on, Ms. Davies. Jessica nodded, then walked over to the evidence table. I'd like to talk about the day the will was signed. You testified earlier that your mother was perfectly lucid, that she asked you to call your lawyer and make these changes. Yes, that's right, Susan said, clinging to her story. But the nursing home records, and the testimony of Nurse Brenda, state she was confused and disoriented. Are they lying, Mrs. Miller? They're mistaken, Susan snapped. She had good moments and bad moments. That was a good moment. A good moment, Jessica repeated slowly. Let's talk about that moment. She looked at the judge. Your Honor, we have one final piece of evidence. Security footage from the West Wing corridor of Oakwood Meadows Rehabilitation Center, timed at 2:47 p.m. on the day in question. If looks could kill, the one Susan shot me would have leveled the entire courthouse. Pure, un adulterate d'atred. A technician set up a large monitor. Jessica hit play. The footage was grainy but clear. It showed the hallway outside my grandmother's room. The door opened. The notary, George Peterson, walked out first. Then came Susan. She was holding my tiny, frail grandmother by the elbow, practically propping her up. Eleanor looked lost, her head lolling slightly. As they stood by the door, Susan could be seen holding a pen and a document. She put the pen in my grandmother's hand. And then, clear as day, Susan put her own hand over my grandmother's, her fingers engulfing Eleanor's frail ones, and moved her hand in a signing motion across the bottom of the page. A guided hand, exactly as the expert had described. It was undeniable. It was monstrous. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. My mother let out a small sob. Susan was frozen, her face a mask of horror. She stared at the screen as if seeing a ghost. Jessica paused the video on the close-up of their hands. "Mrs. Miller," she said, her voice echoing in the silent room. "You testified your mother signed this will of her own free will. Does this look like a woman of sound mind, making her own decisions? Or does this look like a desperate woman committing fraud, manipulating her sick, confused mother for financial gain?" Susan just stared, speechless. "No further questions, Your Honor." Susan stumbled off the stand, a broken woman. She didn't even look at her lawyer. She just stared at her hands, the same hands that had guided my grandmothers to steal my home, my inheritance, and my history. The judge didn't even need to deliberate for long. The verdict was swift and brutal. The new will was declared null and void due to clear and convincing evidence of undue influence and fraud. The original will, the one that left the house to me, was reinstated. The judge also awarded me punitive damages and ordered Susan to cover all of my legal fees. It was a total, complete, and utter destruction. Justice, delivered not with a bang, but with the quiet, methodical presentation of the truth. The aftermath was surreal. My parents tried to approach me outside the courthouse, my mother with tears in her eyes. "Clara, we're so sorry." I just looked at them, at their weak, belated support, and felt nothing but a profound emptiness. "I have to go," I said, and walked away, leaving them standing on the courthouse steps. The relationship with them, like so many other things, was a casualty of Susan's war. A week later, I stood in the front hall of my grandmother's house. It was officially mine. The garish for sale sign was gone. The landscapers had been stopped before they could destroy the entire garden. But as I walked through the quiet, empty rooms, I realized something. The house was tainted. The memories were still there, but they were now overlaid with the ugliness of the past year. It was a beautiful house, but it was no longer my home. It was a monument to a battle I had won, but the war had left its scars. I made a decision. I hired a local realtor, a kind woman who had known my grandmother for years, and I put the house on the market. But with one condition. The new owners had to be a family who loved the garden. 3 months later, it was sold to a young couple with 2 little kids who fell in love with the rose bushes and the big backyard. Watching them play on the lawn during the final walkthrough, I felt a sense of peace. The house would be filled with laughter again. That was a legacy Eleanor would have loved. It's been 2 years now. I don't live in a big city or a small town. I live in a quiet suburb just outside of Columbus. With the money from the house and the punitive damages, I did something the old Clara would have never dreamed of. I went back to school. I'm in my 2nd year of law school now, and I'm at the top of my class. I volunteer on weekends at a legal aid clinic that specializes in elder law, helping families protect their most vulnerable members from predators, sometimes from within their own families. I am forging a new life not from the ashes of my old one, but from the strength I discovered in the fire. I am no longer just a paralegal. I am an advocate. I am no longer just the hired help. I am the one who helps. My grandmother taught me that quiet rivers run deep. I finally understand what she meant. The noise and flash of my aunt's life washed away, revealing only debt and deceit. My own quiet, steady current carved a new path, one of purpose and strength. I am triumphant, I am empowered, and I am finally, truly home within myself. For anyone who has ever been the caregiver, the one who sacrifices in silence, only to be taken for granted or betrayed. What was the moment you realized your kindness was being mistaken for weakness? And how did you finally reclaim your power? Let me know your story in the comments below.